Jeremy Corbyn has announced plans to invest an additional £4.8 billion into England's school system by 2022 if Labour wins the election. To fund the increase, the Tories' cuts to corporation tax will be reversed.
It's only fair that businesses should be asked to contribute to the plan by financing the steps that we are setting out today. And we will do this by reversing the tax cuts made by the Conservatives and still keep UK rates of corporation tax at the lowest of the group of 7 most industrialised countries. It's what we term our new settlement. When it comes to small businesses, the backbone of our economy, a Labour government will restore small profits rates and make only a modest increase. And to the owners and the leadership of larger businesses and corporations, we will slowly raise your level of corporation tax to 26% by the end of the next Parliament. It was 28% when the coalition government came into office in 2010. Again, this is actually below the level of the last Labour government. Inclusive, fair and costed. That's our plan to upgrade our economy.
So, does increasing corporation tax make economic sense? Well, Richard Murphy from Tax Research UK and City University in London thinks so. He joins us via Skype from Ely in Cambridgeshire. And Julian Jessop disagrees. He's Chief Economist at the Institute of Economic Affairs and joins us now from our Westminster studio. Well, Richard, let me start with you first. You actually don't think Labour are going far enough. You'd like to see corporation tax raised even more. Why?
3 reasons, really. First of all, this stops tax abuse. Very large numbers of companies in the UK are now formed simply because people are using them to undermine the income tax system and the national insurance system and pay much lower tax than they would otherwise pay. That makes no sense at all. It costs the country around £4 billion, which could be much better spent, and therefore that's the first advantage. The second big one is that actually this puts us on a level playing field with other countries, and that's fine, that's where we should be. But thirdly, it encourages investment. If this new rate of tax was matched with an increase in investment allowances to 100% in the year that a company did spend money in the UK economy, the subsidy provided to a company invested would increase from about £3.80 for every £100 spent to £26 for every £100 spent. And that would mean more investment, more growth, more productivity, wage increases, more taxes paid, a spiral upwards, which would not only pay for itself, but of course it would pay for this investment in education, which itself would massively increase the return to the UK economy. This is a win from beginning to end.
Yeah. The Institute for Fiscal Studies are quite sceptical about that, though. They say it depends on how the money's invested. But also, on this point of cutting corporation tax, 2010, corporation tax was at 28% and it raised £43 billion. Last year, when it was only 20%, it raised nearly £50 billion. I mean, surely that is proof that cutting corporation tax is good.
No, it isn't. The reason for the increase is the number of companies grew. And the reason the number of companies grew is because of the rise in the gig economy, the rise in tax abuse, and the rise in employment insecurity because people were forced out of stable jobs into insecure contracting. That's why more corporation tax was paid. That's not a sign of progress. That's a sign of insecurity and people living in a precarious lifestyle where corporation tax had to be paid because that's what their so-called employers demanded. No, there wasn't a real increase in corporation tax at all. That's a myth.
All right, Julian Jessop, let me bring you in here at this point. I mean, what do you think is the optimum tax raising point for corporation tax?
I actually think probably lower than the rates that we are currently paying. I think the key point here is that companies aren't some sort of magic tree that you can shake and loads of money falls out. In reality, corporation tax is ultimately paid by ordinary people. It's paid by pensioners who own shares in companies, or it's paid by workers who might face lower wages if their companies can't afford to pay their tax bills. It's paid by all of us if investment is lower and economic activity is lower. I think a whacking great big increase in tax, as the Labour Party is proposing, would be very damaging to the economy, particularly at a time when most countries are heading in the opposite direction.
But what about Richard Murphy's point, though, that if you recycle these tax revenues in education, you raise money in education, spending on education, you get a bigger bang for your buck? I mean, is there much evidence that cutting corporation taxes actually boosts economic growth?
Well, in the long run, increases in spending on education and maybe even health could boost the productive potential of the economy, and I think socially would be a good thing. But in the short run, there's no doubt that massive hikes in corporation tax would be very damaging. As I say, most countries are already moving in the opposite direction. And when we're wanting to send a signal to the rest of the world that Britain is open for business after Brexit, I think reversing the corporate tax cuts from the last few years would be exactly the wrong thing to do.
And Richard Murphy, that's quite a crucial point, isn't it? Most other countries are cutting corporation tax, and also this would be a reversal of 45 years' worth of UK government policy. I mean, that is not a good signal to send to businesses when they want to invest.
Look, sometimes you have to send a radical signal. A Conservative Chancellor did that in 1988. It was Nigel Lawson, and he changed the whole system. He made companies pay tax, but he gave them big tax allowances to encourage them to invest. This change that Jeremy Corbyn is bringing in would actually send a signal that Britain really is open to business and really does want to encourage those who want to invest and create jobs in the UK will get lots of tax relief for doing so. There could be no stronger signal that people who are serious about working in this country will get the incentive they require. He's right on this one. There's no economic question otherwise. Corporation tax cuts have never generated growth. This targeted increase, matched with high investment allowances, could deliver a lot of new jobs for this country.
And what about Julian Jessop's point? This is not a pain-free way of raising tax revenue. I mean, ultimately, corporation tax is paid by individuals, isn't it? Either those who hold shares directly, everyone who holds shares in their pension funds.
Well, I don't dispute that. In fact, it is by and large paid by shareholders. There is no real evidence that it's paid by employees. That's a nonsense. Let's talk about the shareholders. Unfortunately, we have massive wealth inequality in this country. We may not wish to recognise that, but in fact, clearly that's the case. Over half the country has almost no savings at all. A tax on companies does help to reduce inequality, and that is good for this country because if we redistribute the money towards those who need it, students, for example, who can't afford access to university, we not only give them a chance, but we increase their spending, and that's good for growth as well. The wealthiest don't spend. The poorest people in this country spend all their income and maybe more, and that stimulates the economy. This is another move which helps us as a result.
All right, very briefly, Julian, last word to you. George Osborne taxed the banks very aggressively. He put a surcharge on profits. He put on a banking levy. Are the banks overtaxed in this country?
Actually, no, I don't think they are. I think there are plenty of businesses that have behaved very badly in the last few years who probably should be paying more tax. But ultimately, I don't think Richard's arguments make sense. He can't say on the one hand that the government can raise a lot more money from increasing corporation tax and then say that's offset in some way by investment allowances, which mean giving money back to companies. If the Labour does want to raise a significant amount of money from corporates, then their tax bills do have to go up.